of that right now. So we're going to give you guys a chance to weigh in on a question that'll help set the tone for today's panel. Our question for you is, if you had to assign animal agriculture a grade based on its sustainability efforts, what grade would you give? And it's an A through F option. So take a minute here, think about it, and weigh in. If you were assigning animal ag a grade based on how we're doing on sustainability, what do you think? Okay, so most people are giving us an A, B, or C. B is the most popular answer with 62%. Pretty good answer, means there's some room for improvement, which I think today's speakers would certainly agree. So some interesting results, and we'll let the speakers react to those if they'd like, but it sounds like most people think we're doing pretty well, but there's certainly room to improve. That brings us to the topic of today's webinar, titled Connecting Around Sustainability, Where is Animal Ag Headed? We'll be hearing from sustainability experts representing various groups across animal agriculture, including Claire Masker-King, Director of Sustainability Communications at the National Pork Board, Karen Scanlon, Vice President of Sustainability Partnerships at Dairy Management, Inc., Ashley McDonald, Executive Director of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, Ryan Bennett, Executive Director of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, and Eric Mittenthal, Vice President of Sustainability at the North American Meat Institute. Bios for all of our speakers are available on the virtual summit website. We'll drop a link in the chat, so I don't want to take away time from their excellent presentations, but if you want to know more about their background, you can check out the virtual summit website. With that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Claire Masker-King, Director of Sustainability Communications at National Pork Board. Take it away, Claire.
Thank you, Hannah, and good afternoon. Excited to be able to speak to you all today about how the Pork Board and how we're connecting around sustainability with our producers as well as with individuals in our supply chain. On the next slide, just some pig basics that we have around who we are at the National Pork Board. We're the National Checkoff Organization. We represent more than 63,000 pig farmers with 125 million pigs that are marketed a year. That's about 25 billion pounds of pork produced, and we support over 550,000 US jobs with 66.7 billion in downstream revenue. Exports are a very important piece of what we do at the National Pork Board and a very important piece of adding value to our producers' bottom line. As we all know, things are challenging. Right now, we expected earlier this year about 30% of our production to be exported around the world. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about our We Care ethical principles, and this is where we ground our sustainability work. In 2008, producers across the country adopted these 6 ethical principles to guide what we do on the farm. And if you see what these ethical principles are, and if you talk to people in the industry, it wasn't that we just started focusing on food safety, environment, our people, community, public health, and animal well-being in 2008. It's that we just put those down. So these are ethical principles that have guided our producers, you know, since even when my grandpa was farming and raising pigs. So I think it's important for us to know that, but also to know that our commitment is stronger than ever to these ethical principles and doing what's right for people, pigs, and the planet. Because on the next slide, we talk a lot about earning public trust. And it's our public trust and our commitment to that is stronger than ever before. We know that consumers have more questions now than they've ever had about how pigs are raised, and our impact on the environment and what that looks like. And we want to earn their public trust, and we're committed to that. Because we really think, and we show this on the next slide, that trust is earned through data and transparency. We no longer in the agriculture community can just say we're doing good things on the farm. We have to show our data, and we have to have examples of what we're doing on the farm. Because when consumers see that data, they learn from us, and they get excited about what they're able to do, and we're giving them permission to eat pork, especially in our example, but we want to give permission to consumers to feel good about what they're eating. And one of those examples that I bring up on the next slide about our data is our reduced environmental footprint. So we've reduced our land use. We did a retrospective assessment of US pork production at the University of Arkansas, and we've reduced our land use by over 75%. And some people might ask if that's because, you know, we use modern barns to protect our animals. And a lot of that reduction in land use actually comes from our improvement in feed efficiency. Our water use has declined by 25%. Our carbon footprint, which is one that we're excited about, is down by 7.7%. And our energy use is down by 7%. And this is per pound of pork produced. So per pound of pork, we're really reducing our land, our water, and our carbon. And we've been excited to share that. In 2020, you know, I think as all of us, we've really pivoted in what we're working on in agriculture, given the current situation and the impact that COVID-19 is having for the farmers we work with. But we also want to keep moving forward on a couple projects. One of that is our carbon footprint calculator. We have a great story to tell in the pork industry. We have on-farm data that we can show that how producers are reducing that carbon footprint, because some pig farms are carbon negative, meaning that the way that they contain their manure and the types of technology they use on their farm for electricity, such as solar panels or LED lights, means, and then the manure they put on the crops to grow corn and soybeans means that they actually take in more carbon on those corn and soybean fields than they do emit through their production of pigs. So we think this is a great story to tell. But again, as we talked about needing data, our carbon footprint calculator will allow producers to know what their carbon footprint, and also be able to use that to make management decisions in the hopes of, you know, maybe possibly reducing some costs for them on the farm. So we're very excited about that in 2020. Obviously, right now we are extremely focused on COVID-19 and the impact that this is having on our industry. But we definitely want to make sure that we also stay focused on our sustainability metrics so that we can be able to share that with our customers and when that becomes appropriate and once we get past this situation. We have a sustainability report available for the pork industry. It's available at porkcares.org, and it highlights each of our ethical principles and data behind those ethical principles and what we've done to share and become even more sustainable. And I think, Hannah, that Karen is next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Scanlon, and I'm Senior Vice President for Sustainability Initiatives at Dairy Management Incorporated. And on behalf of dairy farmers, I help to support the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. And so I'll introduce you to the Innovation Center and then tell you more about the social responsibility pledge and the social responsibility work that is underway through the Innovation Center. And so if we can go to the next slide. The Innovation Center is a voluntary organization of farmers, cooperatives, processors, retailers, and trade associations that works with leaders from across the dairy value chain to align on pre-competitive priorities. So issues that affect the entire industry, and works together to drive progress and to really speak with one voice. The actions of the Innovation Center are directed by a board of directors, and that board includes CEOs and chairs of companies that represent approximately 60% or more than 60% of the US milk supply. And then we also have CEOs from national associations that represent farmers and manufacturers. Many more companies are engaged in the work, the social responsibility work that's promoted by the Innovation Center. And as you can see here, there are a number of, if you can go back one slide, please. There are committees and task forces that are set up to lead and spearhead a lot of the priorities identified by the board of directors. We have the Dairy Sustainability Alliance, which I'll talk about in 1 minute, and then the Common Voice Network that connects communicators across the dairy industry. And so really reaching out to a multi-stakeholder group of more than 300 companies and individuals and farmers across the dairy community, brought together through the Innovation Center. So on the next slide, you can see a little bit more about who the Dairy Sustainability Alliance is. We have, I think we're up to 120, more than 120 companies and organizations that are brought together under the common umbrella of interest in promoting and advancing dairy sustainability. So you see we have from industry suppliers, we have more than 40 farmers from across 24 different states across the country. We have cooperatives, processors, food chain partners, partners in the government, dairy checkoff organizations, and then civil society and other agricultural groups. What brings everyone together is an investment in and keen interest in advancing dairy sustainability. And the Alliance meets regularly in person and via webinar to exchange information and really have that valuable learning from each other. I mean, as Claire pointed out, building trust through data and transparency is a big part of how we can credibly talk about and grow dairy sustainability, and the Alliance plays a big part in that. So on the next slide, this gives you a little bit more focus on the vision and the mission of the Innovation Center. That's really about working together to ensure an economically viable and socially responsible U.S. dairy community from farm to table. And on the right-hand side, you see those core areas of focus: people and community, nutrition, animal care, environmental stewardship, and food safety. And at the heart of it all is the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment, which is the pledge that companies and dairy companies and dairy cooperatives take to pledge to report on and demonstrate progress in these important areas of social responsibility. And so individual companies and processors can adopt the stewardship commitment. And on the next slide, you'll see that what it really does. It really stands as a being part of a movement to advance dairy's values, to participate in work that defines what the industry stands for. And it's a way to more transparently and more regularly communicate greater understanding of dairy's commitment to and its stewardship. It provides a common set of measurement terms and metrics and measures. So every company that adopts the stewardship commitment is measuring in the same way. And so that enables some consistency of measurement of progress across the industry, and also enables us at the Innovation Center to aggregate up those common measures, and we're able to report on behalf of every company adopting the commitment and really speak to what U.S. Dairy collectively is achieving in these important areas. And on the next slide, you'll see that there are minimum terms of adoption. So what does it really mean to adopt the commitment? Well, it means that each of those adopting companies are taking specific actions in animal care, in environmental stewardship, in food safety and traceability, in community contributions and supporting their communities, and are actively engaged in stewardship and sustainability in their companies and in the dairy community at large. So that's what it really means. And it means that there is a commitment to each of these areas, and they're agreeing to report and use common metrics across the industry and enable us to speak on behalf of U.S. Dairy through the Innovation Center. And through the Innovation Center, so the stewardship commitment is really the foundation and enables us to speak collectively about U.S. Dairy's sustainability progress. And through the Innovation Center, the Environmental Stewardship Committee over the last year developed a set of a new vision for environmental stewardship for U.S. dairy, as well as a set of goals. And on the next slide, I believe we will see those goals. Yes, thank you. And so through a consultation process and stakeholder involvement, the goals were developed. The goals were shared out through the Alliance. We got feedback. The feedback came back to the committee. The committee recommended goals to the Innovation Center board, and these goals were unanimously adopted by the board earlier last month. And we're pleased to announce these goals for U.S. dairy. By 2050, U.S. dairy collectively, which means at the field, farm, and processor levels, commits to become carbon neutral or better, to optimize water use while maximizing recycling, to improve water quality by optimizing utilization of manure and nutrients. And also committing to reporting every 5 years on progress toward those goals. And the reporting will include markers of progress that are included in the stewardship commitment. So hopefully you're seeing how these things all tie together. And happy to tell you more about the goals as we continue the conversation today, but wanted to give you an overview of the work that is happening through the Innovation Center around sustainability. And I believe that is my last slide. So now I get to hand it over to Ashley McDonald with the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef.
Well, thank you, Karen. I hope everyone can hear me and see me okay. Yes, so I have the pleasure today of giving you a quick update on the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. So thanks to Hannah and the Animal Ag Alliance for putting the panel together today. John, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll just kick it off by saying, the mission of the USRSB is to advance, support, and communicate continuous improvement of sustainability across the U.S. beef value chain. So we want to get better and we want to talk about it, I think is what that, if you condense it to less words. And we want to be seen as the trusted global leader in environmentally sound, socially responsible, and economically viable beef. And so the next slide, if you go to it, it begins to say how we have tried to start to implement that mission and that vision. So still a fairly new organization formed in 2015, but over the course of the next 3 years, we worked on pulling together the main pieces of what we call the U.S. beef industry sustainability framework. And those are high priority indicators, metrics under those 6 high priority indicators for each of the supply chain segments, all the way from the cow-calf producer, all the way to the restaurant or the retail establishment. And then last, the guidance material, which is probably what makes up the majority of the material in the framework, which is all of the information you as a cow-calf operator, as a feedlot operator, as a packing facility manager would need to know to assess your own operation and potentially find ways to improve in different areas across those 6 high priority indicators. And then we packaged that all together to come up with the framework. And so that framework ended up to be, of course, basically a big white paper. And so what we wanted to do then was to package that in a way that was much more user-friendly. So my next few slides will go into how we are trying to take that white paper and actually put it into useful tools and resources. So John, if you'll go to the next one. Sorry, my font's got a little messed up there in putting it in the system, but basically this slide just kind of shows you what we decided in our strategic planning last year, which is we will create a new work stream, which will be around goals development for the industry, so kind of building off of what Karen just said with the dairy goals, beef is committing to do that as well, and that'll take us probably a little over a year. Right now, we just launched or just sent to our membership a phase 1 goals report to finalize our process in that area. And then it also shows how those few headers that you see that say build awareness and promote adoption. And those are really focused on our outreach and education program. And that program will take us over the next couple of years to, again, turn that framework into a virtual e-learning interactive module system for every supply chain segment. So There will be cow-calf modules, as well as feed yard modules, as well as packers and processor modules, as well as retail and food service modules. So that's one of the key things about the USRSB, is a core recognition that improvements in the beef sustainability footprint is a responsibility of everyone in the entire supply chain. And our membership is not only made up of folks in the supply chain, from the cow-calf sector all the way to the retailers like Costco or Walmart, or food service like McDonald's and Culver's and Taco Bell, but also allied industry. So our financial institutions, as well as pharma companies, as well as others. And it also includes civil society, so our research institutions, as well as our conservation organizations. So it's a full stakeholder roundtable, which is why we gave it the term a roundtable. And again, everybody realizes that they have, one, a stake in beef sustainability. They have an opinion to bring forward, and that is very important. And so we want to hear all of those. And so we're, again, over the next couple of years, what we're trying to do is take that framework to, I want to say to the countryside, but it's much more than that, to the restaurants, to the retailer facility, to the packing plant, to everywhere, to, again, drive implementation, because ultimately we have to start putting things on the ground, actions on the ground, to make and see improvements. We know those things will happen in the industry, but we want to hasten them. We want to advance them. We want to support them and make them bigger and better. And so this is how we plan to do it. So John, if you go to the next slide. So one of the things we instituted over the last year was a recognition program for supply chain programs that are already out there and incorporate the USRSB sustainability framework. We want to be able to recognize them if they want that recognition. And so far, we have found over 13 million head of cattle and 18 million pounds of beef are now utilizing the framework in these programs that cover that amount of animals or beef. So we are having an impact in a relatively short period of time that we've been in existence, and we'll continue to drive that forward. So next, John, you will see this is the landing page of our website that has a learning tab now, and this is where you can find those modules that I talked about. We've just launched on Wednesday. We launched the cow-calf modules, so those are out there for you to peruse and see how we have taken that framework and turned that into a learning opportunity. So on the next slide, which is something, again, that I know a lot of folks on the line are probably interested in, which is the goals development line of work that we have begun. So our plan to date is, and again, this is subject to approval by our membership, but to develop these industry goals across those 6 high priority indicators, which is land, water, air, animal health and well-being, worker safety and well-being, as well as efficiency and yield. And then after we have, or during the same process in a parallel workspace as the industry goals are being developed, also create sector specific targets. So the cow-calf sector, the feed yard sector, they would actually look at these larger goals and what's being discussed and actually determine what they as a sector could contribute to that overall industry goal. So it is kind of a parallel track of work here between that high level industry goals, which will be, of course, evaluated over time against the beef industry life cycle assessment to see where we are. But then we can hone in more specifically and find specific areas and projects that we can put on the ground based around these sector specific targets. And so that's where one of the ways USRSB will kind of target its efforts in the future. So with that, John, if you go to that last slide, I'll just say we have made a concerted effort at USRSB and the other proteins as well to try to work together more. And I think we have done a lot of that. And I know Eric's going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but we have come together on a number of things, one of which was sustainable feed and working with the other commodity sustainability initiatives like Field to Market. on issues like that. And we in fact have a task force with Field to Market to put some pilots on the ground to figure out how can we better share information up and down the feed supply chain as it moves into the beef supply chain, so that our end customers know that even the beef they're eating are improving through the feed that we feed those cattle as well. So with that, I will turn it over to the Executive Director of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, Ryan Bennett.
Thanks, Ashley. So if you go to the next slide, my name's Ryan Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of two organizations, International Poultry Welfare Alliance, as well as the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs. The International Poultry Welfare Alliance is obviously international in nature, focused primarily on animal welfare, but understanding that animal welfare issues also have a place in broader sustainability issues as well. And then what I'm here to talk about today, which is the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, which is set up very similar to the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef that Ashley just talked about. It is both of these groups are multi-stakeholder in nature, as you can see from this membership slide here. We really got started about a year and a half ago, and so our membership drive is just continues to evolve. In fact, about the time that I get one of these slides done, it's already out of date, and that's certainly the case with this one, with a couple of logos from new members who have recently joined. But we have a 15-person board of directors with 3 from each of our 5 constituency groups. So we have 3 growers at the table with 3 integrators and processors, at the table with 3 allied and supplier representatives, 3 retail and food service representatives, and then 3 from civil society, which includes our sister associations and those environmental organizations that you see represented here. So sister organizations, meaning like the National Chicken Council, the United Egg Producers, or the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association, which really the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs grew out of into its own individual organization, but with the support of U.S. Poultry and Egg. So if you go to the next slide, we have a very similar vision and mission, as I mentioned, to the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We're structured very, very similar as an organization, but obviously we have a very different industry structure, different species, so on and so forth. So our definition of sustainability that we're operating off of is to have a sustainable poultry and egg value chain that can verify that they are environmentally sound, socially responsible, and economically viable. And we do that through 3 pillars of people, planet, and poultry. And what we've done underneath of those 3 pillars is identify indicators which will then have metrics underneath of them. So those indicators include community support, food safety and quality, food security, people well-being, and then under planet, air quality, land use, water usage and quality, and then under poultry, we'll be creating metrics for animal health, animal well-being, as well as productivity and efficiency. So if you look at this slide, we really have done a lot of work in first of all, bringing the correct people to the table to begin identifying these pillars and indicators. And now we're going, if you go to the next slide, we're starting to move forward with refining and prioritizing metrics here in Q2. And what we're starting to already look at is piloting the draft version of our framework, which that framework is really those indicators and metrics of how we will define, measure, and then ultimately communicate our sustainability continuous improvement throughout the entire poultry and egg value chain. So we're looking at having a draft of the first version of our framework in Q3 of this year. And then, as I mentioned, we're already starting to work on some guidelines and thought process around piloting of our draft framework and looking for a public comment period by Q3 of next year. And then in 4 of 2021, we plan to release the framework. And at this point, we are on time to release that framework with our proposed schedule of by the end of 2021. We continue to, gain momentum over time. And I'll talk a little bit later, I think, about maybe some of the work that, has gone into all of these different sustainability roundtables and how we've benefited from, being one of the newer groups to the table. But for right now, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Eric at NAMI.
Thank you, Ryan. And I want to share a little bit about what we're doing on sustainability. And we have positioned the North American Meat Institute, our effort, as earning trust in animal protein, but it's a sustainability effort. We've really focused the way we talk about it, thinking about what we want our end goals to be. If you're not familiar, next slide. If you're not familiar with the North American Meat Institute, our members produce 95% of the red meat in the U.S., the packers and processors of beef, pork, lamb, and veal, and 70% of the turkey. And move on to the next slide. We adopted a new vision, mission, and values last year as our members were thinking about some of the challenges that our industry is facing and some of the criticisms that are out there about our industry. And it was notable that within there included the term sustainable and strengthening trust. And so we wanted to think about how we could build a framework toward a more sustainable industry and earning trust in animal protein, and felt it was really important to do as the North American Meat Institute, because we are a step closer to the end consumer. We bring all of the proteins together under one umbrella. So really see ourselves as a convener in this effort and really able to work together with all the other groups that have come before us. So in order to develop our framework, we brought together some of the sustainability experts from our member companies and some of our board members as well. And we developed a framework on the next slide with 5 key pillar areas that will look familiar when you compare what we're doing compared to our previous speakers, focused on food safety, environment and the planet, animal care, health and wellness, and labor and human rights. And overarching all of those areas, we see transparency as crucial for ourselves and for our industry, with a foundation of economic viability and business ethics for the industry. And we approached these really thinking about what are the big, bold goals that we could look at over the next decade to earn consumer trust, and then build metrics and targets around those. So I want to share with you in the next few slides some of the bold goals that we have developed looking forward over the next decade. And our plan is for all of these bold goals to build in metrics and targets that will be very aligned with some of the things that all the other groups are doing as well. So for the first one on food safety, on the next slide, our food safety bold goal is the meat and poultry supply chain produces safe meat products without exception. Very aspirational, very bold, not necessarily achievable, but something that we felt like it's important to work towards. On the next one, we have animal welfare. Design and universally adhere to a globally accepted and outcome-based standard for animal welfare at all points in the supply chain. On the next one, we have health and wellness. Uphold animal protein as consumers' preferred choice for nutrition, health, and wellness. And on the next slide, we have labor and human rights. Be an employer of choice through an unyielding commitment to diversity, inclusion, employee occupational health and safety, and human rights. And then our final one on environmental impact is still in draft. And I think as you've heard our previous speakers today talk about carbon neutral or even carbon negative in some circumstances, our initial goal was to lead the global animal protein industry to achieve the best environmental outcomes of meat production on land, air, and water in the world. As we've heard from other groups and recognized that I think there's an expectation and a capability to be carbon neutral. And so We're still refining what our environmental goal is going to be, and I think it's going to be more along the lines of what Karen outlined with dairy and trying to be carbon neutral in the future. And so we're working on that and continuing to build on that. And then next slide. We see this really as a project or initiative that will occur with two phases in parallel. The goals are going to work towards continuous improvement for the industry. So there will be specific metrics and targets that we are developing that will aim us towards continuous improvement over the next decade. And as I mentioned, those will be aligned with what the other groups are doing. And I think you've heard everybody talk about continuous improvement and metrics and targets that they're developing. And our hope is that we'll all be working together on that. And then there's the communications element of it. We need to take the improvement that we're making and tell our story. And so I think that's a key part of it, that we're trying to also engage with everybody across the supply chain on the communications part as well. And we've had, if you move to the next slide, we've talked to a lot of members about this and talked about it. You know, what's a real succinct way to sum it all up and pull it together? And for us, it's do the right thing, prove it, and tell your story. And I think as an industry, we've done a great job at the do the right thing and tell your story part. I don't think we put a lot of focus on proving it. And so that's where the metrics and targets element and the improvement element really comes in, that we have to prove it and be transparent about how we're proving it in order to tell our story. If you move to the next slide, we are all working together on this, as I've mentioned. And so we're about a year into this, and the groundwork that all of the other groups who have spoken today that they've laid has been extremely beneficial for us. We see ourselves as a convener in this effort, and so we're going to continue to work together with all of them and hopefully all of you as we move this forward. And so on my final slide, I've been leaving it with our members with a takeaway message for them, and I think it's relevant for everybody here as well. None of this succeeds without everybody in the industry participating. We will not achieve any of the metrics and targets that we are aiming to set without our members doing the improvements that they need to do to reach them. And so I would say to everybody, you know, what should you do? We need you to be our champions for sustainability. Adopt the best practices that all of us are laying out and work towards those metrics and targets. And then share across the industry, share across the supply chain, be a champion for sustainability and transparency. The transparency part is really crucial as well. So with that, I think we'll open up for Q&A for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much to each of you for sharing those insights, background information about your industry's programs. If everyone wants to put their camera and mic back on, perfect. I see everyone popping back up, a little Brady Bunch screen here. So we had some questions that the panel and I had come up with, and a lot of them are very similar to the questions in the Q&A box, which is great. So I'm kind of going to do a little combo of both as we get through Q&A here. The first question, it's in the Q&A box from Wendy Pinkerton with Zoetis, which is also a question we had talked about, which is, what are the species' future goals for improved sustainability, and what metrics are going to be used to measure success? So I'll let you each kind of have a crack at that. I know some of you covered that a little bit, some of you a lot, some not at all. So I'll kind of give you each the opportunity to weigh in on what your future goals are and what metrics will be used. So we'll start with Claire.
We're working on metrics and having KPIs for our industry. We started that work in discussions at our January board meeting and then at our March board meeting. Obviously, a lot has changed within our industry. We're still hoping to be able to announce those KPIs early next year, but as things have really changed within our industry, and we've dedicated a lot of our work right now to assisting producers to get through COVID-19. That timeline might change a little bit, but still looking at an announcement in 2021 about KPIs for the pork industry.
Matt, actually, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a follow-up, because that was another question. Actually, the most popular question in the box is, do you see sustainability efforts becoming a lesser or higher priority for either your organization or among consumers as a result of the pandemic? And do you think your sustainability messaging to consumers will need to change? So since you brought that up, I'll let you weigh in.
I think it will change in what consumers' expectations are. What that will look like, no one knows. You know, before plastics were the enemy, and I think as we've seen single serve and needing to think about public health, that has definitely changed. So where is this part where health and environment can come together, where we can protect public health, but also improve our environment? So I know that's something that we're looking towards once we come out of this, is how has consumers' views on sustainability changed, but not sure what that looks like right now. I think we'll see more people wanting to cook at home. They're learning to how to cook at home. They're enjoying cooking at home. And so that leads some opportunities for us. But what does that look like on the sustainability front will depend on what things look like when we come out of this.
Thank you. Karen, I'll let you touch on goals and metrics for dairy.
Sure. I'll actually take the second question first, and then I'll answer that one. I think what it says from dairy's perspective, I think every farmer is going through a hard time right now, including dairy farms. And there's certainly a lot of focus on how can we get product, nutritious dairy products where we have hungry families. And so there's a lot of effort right now within the dairy community to do that, just like there is in other parts of agriculture. So I think that's where our immediate focus is. At the same time as that is happening, we had the industry come together and adopt and support these goals. So I think that's kind of a signal to where we are within the dairy community, recognizing that we need to focus efforts immediately on moving product where it needs to be and helping families and communities get through this crisis. At the same time, recognizing it's important to commit to and convey that commitment that dairy farmers and dairy companies have to improving our environmental stewardship and tracking that progress. And in terms of how we do track that progress, we do have some metrics and measurements in place that can be found in the stewardship commitment. Within the commitment, there are indicators and metrics at the field, at the farm, and at the processor level. So that's where we start. We don't have every measure in place today in order to track progress against carbon neutral water use and water quality, but those will be developed over time, and that process has already begun. We've got work, so as I stated, we will use the stewardship commitment to track progress, as well as looking at measures that are available through publicly available data, through partnering with field to market, and through other partnerships that we have in place to pull together and measure. And just a reminder that we're measuring collectively U.S. dairy's progress against these goals. So there's a lot of work to do to make sure that we can accurately and transparently aggregate and report collectively. So more on exactly how we will do that. Some measures in place today, but more to develop.
There's also a follow-up question for you, Karen, from Rob Williams with Meat and Livestock Australia. With your commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, how would you respond to criticism that 30 years is too far away?
My response is these are big goals, and they are not achievable in a short time frame. So a long runway is required to achieve these goals, but we know we have to start today. So that is the commitment, and we have been asked why we haven't set interim targets, like targets closer in 2025 or 2030 targets. And the committee there was strong debate about that. And what came out was a belief that to focus on reporting every 5 years. So, and I guess I didn't go into that too specifically, but along with the goals set out at 2050, the commitment is to report progress every 5 years. And so that really calls us to, rather than we're assessing ourselves every 5 years and able to see where we are. We do have a point that we're working to. We know that we're going to be publicly talking about the progress against those goals on a regular basis. And it allows us to see where adjustments are needed, where progress is being made, and where we can amplify those efforts.
Great, thank you. Ashley, I'll let you comment on goals and metrics.
Sure. So I touched on it too. Yeah, we are beginning the process. So as far as measurement or methodology goes, that's yet to be determined exactly. Of course, I mentioned the life cycle assessment. So that will be used as the kind of the high level, because all of our indicators are subsumed in a lot of the indicators that the life cycle assessment addresses or looks at. So that piece is in there. That's how we'll measure it. The sector specific piece will be that's a big question for the committee right now, is to really kind of define what those targets are. So if they're practice based, if they're more quantifiable based. So I think that's a question for them right now. And then also how do you measure against those? So one of the things we're looking at is trying to do a baseline in the data that is out there. What is publicly available through USDA surveys, or what could we add to some of those surveys or advocate to get included into some of those surveys that could help us measure some of those things. So a lot of ours is yet to be determined. I should have mentioned we're planning to announce all those goals and the measurements and methodologies the end of April next year at our General Assembly meeting, which of course, similar to this one, was canceled in person. And so we had our virtual meeting a couple days ago. But so that's kind of where we are on metrics and measurement.
And then there are two questions in the chat, one from Michelle Miller, the Farm Babe, and one from Nicole Rodriguez, a dietitian, both summit speakers actually. And they are both curious to hear more about the partnerships with World Wildlife Fund. And I know that can be somewhat controversial. I'm sure you've gotten that question a million times from producers. So tell us about that partnership and why you've done that, how it's working, and if there's some skepticism around that, how would you address that?
Well, and I think there's also a question in there about going outside of the ag choir or the ag sector, right? And how are we communicating outside of that? So I think the answer to your questions actually go to that one as well, which is we are self-interested in the beef supply chain or in all of the commodity supply chains. So a lot of what we put out, science or otherwise, is taken at first, at least, as people are skeptical of it, right? Partnerships and working together with stakeholders who also have a stake in the beef industry, by the way, which is why we call them stakeholders, right? Because they work on the landscape and issues on the landscape, and we work on the land in the beef supply chain. So, coming together is, I think, something that we had to do. It was probably overdue. And we actually have found that there are a lot more areas that we agree on than we disagree on. And we're not going to always agree on everything, right? The beef industry is not always going to agree with WWF on every issue. But we found in the roundtable, by coming together and discussing things, they have a sustainable ranching initiative. Their view, as far as everyone I've talked to at WWF in my work, has been that to continue to keep grasslands in grasslands, the only way to do that realistically is to work with ranching and keep cattle out there on the grasslands. And so that's one of their big initiatives. We have one of the last remaining intact grasslands in the entire world here in our backyard in the Northern Great Plains, and they're very focused on keeping that intact. And we can be a solution for that, which also, so it's a protector of biodiversity as well as sequestering carbon and addressing some of the greenhouse gas and climate change issues that folks are concerned about, and we can help be a solution for.
Great, thank you. Ryan and Eric, I know you guys both kind of covered where you're at with your goals during your segments. Do you have anything specific about your goals and metrics you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I'd really like to touch on the COVID-related question about sustainability. So I think a lot of people, when they hear sustainability, they still think primarily about environmental issues. And I think what you find with a lot of our indicators and metrics is that they're pretty holistic in nature. So I mentioned that that we've developed our indicators and we're getting ready to develop our metrics, but really our three pillars are people, planet, and poultry. And those are not, there's not one more important than the other. And so I think maybe embedded in that question, I'm not sure whether it was meant this way or not, but it could have meant from an environmental perspective, how will you see the consumer, possibly demanding or not demanding as much environmental performance or something out of their food. And while I think long term, I don't think that is going to change. I think in the short term, if you go down the list of some of those indicators underneath of those pillars of people and poultry, in our specific case, whether it be food safety, food security, people well-being, or safety, animal health. There's a lot of questions about how we're raising animals in this country, animal welfare. Really, you go down the line and you start to develop a lot of indicators and metrics that, quite frankly, I think would be really helpful to be able to show continuous improvement on in the current situation and going forward. So I actually think that this will increase the need for these types of indicators and metrics and data on these particular issues, but maybe not from our planet pillar as much as from our perspective, our people and poultry pillars becoming more important in the short term.
A very great point. We're coming up on time here. I'm going to give Eric a chance to weigh in, but I know at least Karen definitely has to hop off when we come up on the 2:00 Eastern time. So if the rest of you are okay, we'll hang out for another few minutes and kind of address a couple other, we're almost out of questions here in the chat box. But Karen, if you do have to hop off, thank you so much. Everything is being recorded, so just let everyone know that if you also have to hop off, we certainly respect your time and everything is recorded so you can check it out later. So Eric, I'll let you touch on metrics, goals, and then if you also want to weigh in on kind of the big question, which tends to keep coming up, is what does this current situation mean for sustainability?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple of the topics that we've discussed. I think first of all, related to the current situation, I mean, a crisis puts a magnifying glass on your strengths and weaknesses. And I think we have, if we think about our key pillars, we have shown great strengths in health and wellness, in food safety throughout this. I think environmental impact to an extent, if you look at the impacts of the COVID-19 situation on the environment, our environment has improved, it looks like, and we still have the same number of animals. And so I think there's a decent story to tell there. I do think we have some animal welfare challenges currently related to the crisis. And certainly from our side, the labor and human rights side has been a very big challenge for us. And so in terms of earning consumer trust, we're going to have a lot of work to do there. And so that's certainly an area where I think we'll need to be focused coming out of all this. And I think consumers are going to expect us to be focused coming out of all this. On the topic of WWF and some of the other groups, I think the other thing I would add to what Ashley said is we're going to need to be a little uncomfortable throughout all this. If we go through this process of improvement and are comfortable throughout the whole process, it's not going to be successful. That's not how we earn consumer trust. And so I think partnering with some of these other outside groups that may make us a little uncomfortable, that can push us, is valuable. And we have to choose the right ones, and we can't just go to a vegan group who is aiming to eliminate us and say, yes, partner with us. But I think if we choose carefully with groups that are trying to do the right thing as we are and make us a little uncomfortable, I think that improves us in the long run.
I want to direct this last question to you as well, since you do represent the packers, processors versus the farmer. The question is, what are the processors' roles compared to farms, ranches, or checkoff programs that also represent producers in sharing sustainability stories of animal agriculture?
Well, we have a huge role. I mean, our members turn the animals into meat and make the meat. If we depend on the whole supply chain depends on us. So we're a key role in that process, and we'll continue to share the stories of what's occurring throughout the whole supply chain. And we're working with everybody here to do that from a communications perspective.
Awesome. As we kind of wrap up, my one last question for any of you to weigh in would be, what is the action item? So what is the role for everyone listening in this conversation and engaging with your groups? If everyone's going to hop off the line and just go out and do one thing on sustainability, what is that? Claire, we'll start with you.
I think it's getting comfortable with sharing our data and metrics throughout the entire supply chain. That's how we'll earn trust and transparency. So be willing and able to share your metrics.
Great. And Ashley?
Sure. I always sum it up by saying if you can start to talk about your efficiency, if you're in the supply chain, if you can talk about efficiencies in terms of sustainability, that will help us ingrain the word throughout the supply chain. And then also, I always say that, we are committed, in the beef world, we are committed to continuous improvement, and we're going to build on an already very successful legacy. So let's give some credit to what we have done in the industry, but also recognize that, we're not done, we're not staying stagnant, we're continuing, but we've got to talk about it, much to Eric's point. So, give us a little credit, but then say that, recognition of that we're making a commitment to continue to improve. We're going to set goals, and we're going to strive to achieve those goals if at all possible.
Awesome. Ryan?
I would say understand what is important to you and your operation or business. Understand what is important to your community or neighbors and what is important to them, as well as understanding what is important to your customer, whether that be the next person in the supply chain or the ultimate end customer, and find ways that you can participate in tracking your continuous improvement on those different things that is important to your stakeholders in your community and your customers. Track those and communicate about them in a clear and transparent way.
And Eric?
All of those things. Transparency is my big one. Be transparent. We really need as an industry to improve our transparency, and that should be a big focus.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much.